So, here is a picture of the Milky Way, and here are some verses from Psalm 19. The heavens are telling the glory of God. The firmament proclaims his handiwork. Day to day pours forth speech. Night to night declares knowledge. There's no speech, nor are there words. Their voice isn't heard, yet their voice goes out through all the earth, and their words to the ends of the world. Those are the opening 4 verses of Psalm 19. And C.S. Lewis, pictured here on the cover of Time magazine in the 1940s, C.S. Lewis described Psalm 19 as the greatest poem in the Book of Psalms and one of the finest lyrics in the world. And it's about Lewis's view of the heavens that I want to talk to you in the next 45 minutes. I think we need to finish about 8 o'clock. And in particular, I want to talk about C.S. Lewis's view of the heavens in connection to his most famous books, the 7 Chronicles of Narnia, which were published 1 per year from 1950 to 1956, and which are still selling incredibly well. I think about 3 million copies annually, worldwide, in over 30 different languages. And these recent feature film adaptations are introducing them to a whole new generation of readers. So you see where I'm going with this. The Narnia Chronicles, I believe, were structured by C.S. Lewis very deliberately, very consciously, but implicitly, to embody and express the characteristics of the 7 heavens. I don't have time to go through all 7 to show you why I believe this, but let's just have a look at 3. First of all, Jupiter. Here is the planet Jupiter, and in the southeast corner there you can just see, maybe, the great red eye, Jupiter's great red spot. Can you see that, some of you? That spot is wider in its diameter than Earth. You could fit the whole of Earth into that spot. Shows you how massive Jupiter is. And here is a picture of the king of the gods, Jupiter, or Zeus as he was known to the Greeks. And if you didn't know that this was a statue of Jupiter, you might mistake him for someone else. But anyway, Lewis wrote a long poem about the planets in 1935, 15 years before he published the first Narnia book, and in that poem he writes about Jupiter himself. And I was reading this poem one night late in bed in about 2003, and when I got to the lines about Jupiter, I did a double take, because Lewis says that one of the things that Jupiter is responsible for, symbolically speaking, is winter past and guilt forgiven. Winter past and guilt forgiven. And those 5 words leapt off the page at me and caused me to stop in my tracks. I thought, I've come across this in another of Lewis's works. This is like a 5-word summary of The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe, because the White Witch's winter passes in that book. It's the central symbolic shift of the story. And Edmund's guilt is forgiven. So I looked a bit more closely at these lines about Jupiter, and the more closely I looked at the imagery in the poem, the more it seemed to relate to the imagery in the book. Principally, kingship. I've already mentioned how kingship is Jupiter's main quality, and think of how Aslan is introduced in The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe. The children in that first story don't know who Aslan is. They think he might just be a regular man, but Mr. Beaver says, Aslan a man? He's the king of the wood. Don't you know who is the king of the beasts? He's not safe, but he's good. He's the king, I tell you. This is the way Aslan is introduced. His kingliness is constantly emphasized. And introductory descriptions always have a special importance in imaginative literature, because they give you the framework, they set the terms within which the character will be developed. And as the story goes on, we hear that Aslan is royal. He's got a royal and solemn head. He's got a royal pavilion, a royal standard, all these royal accoutrements. He ends up crowning the children in the climactic scene. So the kingship is not actually just limited to the portrayal of Aslan. It's also there in the children. The children become kings and queens in the course of the story. Once a king in Narnia, always a king in Narnia. Once a queen in Narnia, always a queen in Narnia. The story is really a clash of kingship between Peter and Edmund. Edmund is promised kingship by the witch. We always tend to remember the Turkish delight. But it's actually the promise of becoming a king that entices Edmund so that he can pay Peter back for calling him a beast. But Peter is shown the castle of Cair Paravel and the 4 thrones, and Aslan says to Peter, "You, O man, must sit in one of these thrones. You must be high king over all the rest." And of course that is indeed what Peter becomes. And even Edmund does become a king in the end, but only after Aslan has demonstrated true kingship in his sacrifice for Edmund's sake. But what does that sacrifice have to do with Jupiter? Isn't it just a reworking of the gospel story? What's that got to do with Jupiter? Well, in the same year that Lewis began writing The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe, he published another book, a book about the poetry of his great friend Charles Williams, in which he said this: "When Williams writes of Jupiter's red-pierced planet, Williams assumes that the huge reddish spot which astronomers observe on the surface of Jupiter is a wound, and the redness is that of blood. Jupiter, the planet of kingship, thus wounded, becomes another archetype, another reflection, of the divine king wounded on Calvary." Now, I really sat up when I noticed this, because this shows us that Lewis very explicitly connects jovial symbolism with the sacrifice of Christ on the cross, which of course he's reworking at the heart of The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe. We have the passing of winter, we have the forgiving of guilt, we have the kingship theme, we have this sacrifice theme. If we look at this woodcut of Jupiter enthroned in the heavens, this is a medieval woodcut showing you Jupiter above, and down below are the people on earth who exhibit his influence. So there on the right you have a coronation scene, in the middle ground on the left you have a man kneeling for judgment, hoping for his guilt to be forgiven, maybe, and in the background you can just make out horses and hounds who are hunting a white stag, a white hart. That's the noblest quarry that kings and queens would hunt in medieval romances. And all these elements, and many others besides, Lewis puts into The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe. These jovial elements. Is it really possible that they could all have arrived there by accident? I don't think so. And it's for these reasons and many others that I have come to the view that The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe is written very deliberately to embody and express joviality. This is the inner logic of the story. This is the kappa element, you might say. Lewis takes the jovial symbolism and he uses it to portray the Christ character, yes, but also to portray the rest of the world, the rest of the imagined world within which this Christ character figures. So that there's a harmony between Christ and the cosmos, between the Christ character and the rest of the story. Which is right and proper, because in this universe, too, the real universe, there is a harmony, a resonance, a relationship between Jesus of Nazareth, the historical incarnate word, and the discarnate word which holds the rest of reality in being. And the planetary symbolism allows Lewis to get in both aspects of Christ at once. So there, in a nutshell, you have the essence of what I argue at great length in Planet Narnia and at slightly shorter length in the Narnia Code. Why would Lewis do this? Assuming this theory is correct, why would he do it? And what value does it give us to know it? Well, the value it gives us to know it is that it shows that these books are much more carefully constructed than we've given them credit for. They're not just a professor at play, they are actually a man at the height of his career, drawing upon his lifelong fascination with these 7 symbols and, as I've said, turning them to Christian effect, baptizing them, putting them in the service of his theological imagination. He doesn't present these symbols for our contemplative consciousness. We don't look at them, we look along them. And that would be the literary reason for Lewis doing this, that it provides him with the kappa element of each story, the pervasive flavour or tone or quality of each book. We experience a jovial world in The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe. We experience a martial world in Prince Caspian, and so on, 7 times over. We don't just want to know what happens, we want to know why it happens, how it happens, the whole quality of this world and its happenings. That's why we can endlessly return to the Narnia books and breathe its atmosphere. So that would be the literary reason for Lewis doing this, and then the theological reason, again, we've already touched on. It provides Lewis with an ability to write his stories about Christ in a fully biblical fashion, not just having a Christ character, a Jesus of Nazareth character who does things for people and to people and with people, but a Christ character whose spirit is spread abroad across the rest of each tale, in the background details, in the path which the children tread in each story, and so on and so forth. Even seemingly random little details like that chess piece in Prince Caspian that they discover in the ruins of Cair Paravel. It's not just a random chess piece, it's a little chess knight with a red ruby eye. Has to be a knight, doesn't it? Because Prince Caspian is a story of knighthood, gallantry, chivalry. That's the inner meaning of that story. And Lewis thought that that was a good reflection, a true symbolic reflection in art of the situation that obtains in the real universe, where all things speak of God. The heavens are telling the glory of God. But even seemingly random things also speak of him, if only we have eyes to see it and ears to hear it, down to the curve of every wave and the flight of every insect. Thank you very much.
Well, good evening. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Amen. He's a great God. I am who I am solely by God's grace. I am nothing. He is everything. And today you'll go with me on a journey when I started, went real young, to where I am today, and solely everything by God's grace. I want to mention that I have some of my books here, and the craziest book ever written by me is something called I Got a Big Butt. B-U-T-T. I know it's kind of crazy like that, but the B-U-T-T is anatomical, number one, because we're facing obesity like crazy in America. And a lot of people are getting ill, and they don't need to be ill. And so I'm trying to change that preventively. But the other but, B-U-T, believe it or not, I got the title from Psalm 13. I know you think I'm lying, but that's where I got it from. David is like, my life hurts. I can't take this anymore. I've tried everything. I'm being surrounded by my enemies. They're attacking me. They're killing me. I'm going down. But I will trust in my Lord, and I will trust in His salvation. And that's made a tremendous impact in my life, where life hurts, and life comes with a lot of failures. It is not success at all times. For me, I see life and death every split second. But when my Lord God is with me, I am not 100% successful, but I have peace in my heart and soul. And He lifts me up, and He lets me see the real me. Nothing. And He lets me see the real Him. You want to know about my God and your God? I want to tell you, you'll find it in Isaiah chapter 40. It's amazing. Chapter 40, verses 12 through 13. It says, who has measured the waters in the hollows of His hands? And I'm not talking about the hollow of His hand and the tap water. We're talking about the Pacific Ocean. We're talking about the Atlantic Ocean. We're talking about the Black Sea, the Caspian Sea, the Red Sea, the Dead Sea, from sea, y'all, to shining sea. And He's got it all in the palm of his hands. That's my God. Don't tell me he is unable, because according to Matthew 19:26, my God is able to do anything and above, far above, according to Ephesians 30:20, far above what I can think or even imagine or even ask for. That's the God I serve today. So yeah, I do have a big but in a sense, because life hurts in many ways, but our God will take us to another plane. And this book, if you ever want to preach the gospel to anybody, it's got the physical, the psychological, and then the spiritual aspect. I have to literally tell you that I struggled writing the spiritual aspect. I didn't want to put it in. I was going to get endorsed by the American Heart Association. But when I said that you have the bread for life and you're eating too much of it, but you need the bread of life. His name is Jesus Christ. He died for you and for me, and He cleansed our sins, and that's what you need. You, America, and the world, and me. So that's what this book is about. If you ever wanted to use it as an evangelical tool and not a diet tool, that's the book, baby. That's what I'm saying. My life is about to crumble because things aren't making sense. I can't even get into a master's program. Well, there's only 50 applicants. There's 50, and I can't even be one of the 3 that get in. I'm beginning to see cracks in the very sound and fine foundation I have built for myself. I'm beginning to see cracks in it. And that doesn't look like me. It doesn't look like the image of, hey, yeah, I'm a 5-year-old kid wanting to be it doesn't fit. All right, here we go. I'm applying early. This is not the normal category where you're applying with 10,000 students. This is a select few who get to apply early. And I'm applying early. They look at I'm not there. They're looking at all my stuff and they're like, you know, I don't know. I'm hearing this later. I don't know. And they're like, you know, let's put him in the normal pile where he's got to reapply with all the other students. There's a lady in there. Her name is Althea. Black lady, and she was the head of the minority students there, and she had seen me work with the kids. She had seen me help the minority kids without getting paid. She had seen me work with them over and over again so they can ace their anatomy test. And she said, I'm sorry. Excuse me 1 second. She stood up. She said, I don't know what kind of student you guys are looking for, but this man here, he was voted 2 years in a row the best teacher at USC. He helps my students excel. He is teaching medical students, and you're not letting him in. And if you don't allow a person like this in, I'm in the wrong board. That night, unanimously, I was voted into the University of Southern California Medical School. I wasn't there, but an angel was working for me when I had no idea she had been watching me. No idea. So we move on. I get into USC Medical School. We're just going like mad dogs. It's an incredible feeling to be a student. It's long hours. It's hardcore. It's not this glamorous life people think it is. It's all, I mean, grueling. Grueling. I'm a third-year medical student. I'm beginning to change my career plans. Oh, lovely. Yeah. I'm beginning to change my plans. Huh. So I'm thinking to the Lord, I'm like, cardiology, that's like 17 years. That's a little too long. How about we go family practice? Family practice, 8 years? Got it. And so I'm thinking I'm going family practice. I'm applying to family practice residencies all over the U.S. And so I'm playing softball with a church, and I'm in the outfield, and I'm crazy. I'm thinking I'm in Major League Baseball, NFL, all put one together. You know, I'm not even there. And so they hit the ball, and it's all over my head, and I'm racing because I'm going to get nobody scoring a touchdown or a grand slam or a home run on me. And so I'm just like, yeah, I got this. And I don't see a ravine here. There's a ravine. Yeah, it's like down. And so I'm like, yeah, and then I'm down. And I hear this, I'm like, that's me? That's not me. Get up, get the ball. You should have caught the ball. Why didn't you catch the ball? I'm talking to myself. And so I can't get up. I can't move my leg. And 911, ambulance, femur fracture, thigh bone fracture. That's insane. I mean, you got to jump off a big cliff to do something that crazy. Yeah, and the doctor says, son, I think you have cancer. I'm like, oh, this is good. It's over now. 5 days and 6 days, I'm crying. I'm like, bye, y'all. Bye, I love y'all. It's over. My life is just of cancer. And I'm hearing this in the hospital bed because he's like, you're not changing my plans. You think you can change your plan? You're not changing my plans. You know, and if you have your Bibles, love to turn to Proverbs 14:12. And I want to read it to you because it's quite distinct of what the Lord says about us. In Proverbs 14:12, it says, there is a way that seems right to a man, but in the end, it leads to death. Amazing. And then there's Jeremiah. I love Jeremiah. Jeremiah 10:23. Let's look at Jeremiah real quick, what he says. I would write this verse down if I were a student, because you're not going to believe what you're about to hear from the Bible. Jeremiah chapter 10, verse 23. I know, O Lord, that a man's life is not his own. It is not for man to direct his steps. Oh, and you thought you were that bad. I thought I was like, I got this. And he's like, your life is not your own, and your steps I will direct. Distinctly heard in the hospital. Not an audible voice. Again in my heart, God telling me, don't change my plans. This is not your plans. This is my plans that I have for you. So we move on. I applied to the right courses. I went the right path. I got to the right... He had to break my leg. And I don't mean this is what he'll do, but hey, I want to tell you something. When God wants what he wants, like Jonah, you get swallowed up. When God wanted what he wanted out of me, he doesn't need to break anybody's leg. And I don't mean, oh, I got to hear from God. Bad things happen to people. Somebody's drunk, they're driving, they hit the car, and people break bones. Okay, I don't mean God allowed it. But in my specific case, not only did God allow it, I feel like he told me, watch your steps. You're off the path. You're off my path. Years went by. I graduated from USC. I got into medicine. I got into cardiology. 10 years had gone after I got into medical school. I was the chief fellow in cardiology, opening up heart arteries. And I got a call going, Dr. K, you need to come down. A man is dying. You got to come down now. I happened to be on call that day. I got my team. We ran downstairs. A man right in front of our face dying, jumped, chest compression, medications, all this, 20 minutes, death, life, death, back and forth, bounce. Got him back to life. He's alive. We are like celebrating. This is the part we love. Bringing the dead back to life. Only by God's grace and only by the skills he has given us. And so all of a sudden I walk out waiting room and I see this lady and I know her. Her name is Althea. I said, Althea, what in the world are you doing here? And she said, the man's life that you just saved, that is my husband. She said, I knew there was some reason why I picked you. And then she turned around and said to me, you know who you are? I said, who? She said, you like black Jesus. I don't know if you can sit and calculate the percentage and the possibility and the probability of a man ending up in my emergency room and he doesn't even live in that area. In Los Angeles, where there are hospitals beyond hospitals beyond hospitals, on the day when I'm on call and I am responsible for opening up heart arteries and I'm responsible to head a team and I get this man, you tell me the possibility and the probability. And again, I heard a voice in my heart saying, my son, you're watching your heart, you're watching your steps. Now watch your master. Watch your master at work. because this is no coincidence. I have put you here for a special purpose at a special time. My number is 7 billion. I don't mean $7 billion. I mean 7 billion souls. And you're like, that's crazy. Who are you? I told you who I am. I am nothing. I'm a big fat zero, but my God is number 1. And when 0 stands by number 1, you get a 10. And if you put more zeros beside you, you get thousands and hundreds, thousands and millions. And we can rock this planet together. But we must mobilize and go. And that is a command. I'm sorry if you didn't get that. Let me help you. In Matthew 28, it didn't say, if you feel like it. And if you want to leave your little comfort zone, you can go. No, it's like go. It is a command for every one of us. Well, I'm not an evangelist. I don't know what to say. Well, go in your neighborhood. Have a little brownie cookie, something special, and love your neighbors. I don't have time. That's the problem. We don't have time for others, and we only have time for ourselves. And why do you think America is falling apart? Because Christians, we're not on our knees, and we're not reaching out. It's time to go. It's time to watch our hearts. It's time to watch our steps. It is time to watch our Master. In the last days, He will pour out His Spirit. And I want to be part of this, y'all. I want to be part of this great revival that's going to hit this land and go beyond. I want you to join me. I want you to join me in prayer. I want you to know that you can do great things through Jesus Christ who strengthens you. I want you to know that you and I may have been today, up till today, living a bankrupt life. Where, okay, I got to graduate from school. I got to get into college. Good. And good. I got to excel in college. Good. I got to excel in sports. Good. I got to get married. I got to do this. Good, good, good. Nothing wrong with it. Nothing. That's what God has called you and me to do. Where is the souls? Why aren't we concerned? This is not a guilt trip. This is to say we are called. It is time. It is in your power and my power to do great things for Jesus Christ. Even if it means that you take 5 minutes of your life and get on your knees and pray for this nation. And pray for men and women who are willing to go out and preach the gospel. We got to move. We got to mobilize. We got to do it now. And you tell me we got time? No time. No time. It's now. Students, excel in school. Excel in sports. Sweat like a mad boy. When everybody's on their Facebook, run like a mad boy. Get stronger and stronger. And excel like a mad girl. Don't stop for nothing. Get into the Word. Do you know what it says about the Word in Deuteronomy 32:47? You should write that down. Deuteronomy 32:47. It says, these words are not idle words. This is, are you ready for this? This is your life. Your life. Your life. Get into the Word. You want to be excellent? Get into the, you want to watch your heart? Get into the Word. Do you want to watch your steps? Into the Word. You want to watch your Master? Into the Word.
Somebody asked me, what do you think it was with your father's administration that really moved him totally in the direction of really understanding God's use of him in that position as president? I said the day he was shot at, the day he was shot. And it was a hellacious day for the family. My dad's shot, we find out about it. We're held at our house. They don't want us to go back to Washington too soon for fear that America will think my father's close to death. He was. So we're being held at home. So we're just getting updates, through phone calls. And so when we finally get back to Washington, D.C. the next morning, 10 o'clock, I walk into the hospital room to see my dad. And my dad, we all remember his sense of humor that day. We all remember the things he said to the doctors, the thing, Nancy, I forgot to duck. All those things made us chuckle. My father was the same with the kids as he was with you. He made us all feel comfortable as he was laying there near death on that first day. And as I walked in, I looked at my dad and I said, "Good morning, Dad." And my dad said, "Well, good morning." And I said, "You know, how are you doing?" "Well, you know, yesterday I was shot." And I said, "Yes, Dad, the world knows you were shot yesterday." "Well, if you're ever going to get shot, don't be wearing a new suit." And I said, "Dad, come on." I said, "What do you mean don't be wearing a new suit?" Well, yesterday, the first day I wore that suit, I just picked it up as a brand new blue suit. And, you know, when I got shot, and when I was going to the hospital, you think they let me undress? I am the president. But last time I saw that suit, it was in shreds in the corner of the hospital, and they actually cut the suit off of me. And I said, "Wow, that's too bad." "Well, that's why I tell you, you're ever going to get shot, don't be wearing a new suit." I said, "Well, Dad, I'll make sure I tell Colleen that if that's going to happen to me, just take something old out of the, you know, out of the closet, I'll wear that." "Well, that young man who shot me, Hinckley." I said, "Yes, John Hinckley." "Well, I understand his parents are in the oil business." "Yes, they are in the oil business." "Well, I understand they live in Denver." "Yes, they do." "Well, do you think they have any money?" I said, "Well, I'm sure they have money, oil business, they live in Denver." "Well, do you think they'd ever buy me a new suit?" They never bought him a new suit. That's all I ever wanted out of the deal. But I imagine if I asked anybody in this room right now, if I asked you all, how many of you could recite the Lord's Prayer, I would imagine most all your hands would go up. And if I said that to my father when I was with him, his hand would go up too. Let me ask you another question. How many of you live it? See, we say it so often, it's like rote. We say it, and then that's it. But how many live it? Ronald Reagan gets shot. He's at the hospital. It's getting better. He's now going to go home to the White House. But what does he do first? He gets out of bed, gets on his knees, thanks God for allowing him to live, and then asks for forgiveness for the man who tried to kill him. Then goes back to the White House and offers up his presidency to God. A few weeks later, a few months later, Pope John Paul, riding through Vatican City, is shot by a would-be assassin. He's in the hospital. What does Pope John Paul do before he goes back to the Vatican? Pope John Paul gets down on his knees and he recites the Lord's Prayer, and he asks for forgiveness for the man who tried to kill him. You have a Catholic and a Protestant, two men, leaders of their part of the world, one religious, one, of course, Washington, D.C. as president, who both now are not just reciting the Lord's Prayer, but two people who, in fact, just lived it and what it meant. They now get together and they have that first meeting. What do you think that conversation was about? Conversation was about God. And God allowing both men to live. And both of them then accepting that God chose them to live for a purpose and a reason. Pope John Paul rededicates, if he even had to, his life to Christ. Ronald Reagan rededicates his life to Christ. And they then begin the relationship and the process to bring freedom to Poland. And it begins the domino theory that would end up bringing down the Berlin Wall in 2009, I should say. Not 2009, but that was the 20th anniversary, 1989. November 9th, 1989. Because both people honored God, and God therefore honored them and what they were trying to do. And both of them wanted the world to be free. And God honored it. It's amazing what we can accomplish if we just allow God in the room. When my father would get together with Mikhail Gorbachev would end every meeting, if it's God's will. Every meeting. And I remember the 2, 3, 4, 5 times I've gotten together with Mikhail Gorbachev, we've done town halls together. I ask him about that. We find out a lot of information talking to Mikhail Gorbachev. Talking about Soviet Union, godless, atheists. Who are these people? Well, you find out that his wife, Raisa's parents, grandparents, I should say, were killed by the Gestapo for simply having religious icons out in the home. They were taken outside and killed by the Gestapo. Mikhail Gorbachev's parents also had religious artifacts and religious icons in their home, but they were hidden behind the pictures of Stalin and Lenin. As I got deeper speaking with Mikhail Gorbachev, I said to him one night, before my father would meet with you to discuss the world and what you two could accomplish working together, my father used to pray. What did you do? Who did you go to? Dad went to God. Where'd you go? I thought he would have said Raisa, his wife. It would have been the correct answer for him. An answer I would have expected. But he and I had gotten together so often about this issue. He finally looked at me and says, Michael, I'm going to tell you something. My grandmother's a Christian. My grandmother used to go to church every single day. And she'd come up to the Kremlin and she'd say, Mikhail, I prayed for the atheists today. I prayed for you. So let me tell you something. Ronald Reagan asked God for guidance in those meetings. Maybe Mikhail Gorbachev didn't. But how many of us know a grandmother that's the reason God's in your home? There's a grandmother who made sure God was in those meetings. And the two of those men ended up working together to ultimately change the world. Remember, Mikhail Gorbachev had to approve walls coming down. I was telling the kids up at the Ranch Center a couple weeks ago how quickly you can lose your freedom. Well, let me take you back to August 12th, 1961. You're in school. You come home. You see your mom. Say, Mom, I'm going to go have dinner tonight with your sister over in East Berlin. And your mom says, that's great, honey. Have a good time. Tell my sister I love her. Tell her I'll see her soon. Hey, if it gets to be late after you have dinner and a movie, you know, stay the night, come home the next day. So you go and you have dinner with your aunt. You go to a movie, it's late, you stay there, you spend the night. Spend the night November 12th, 1961 in East Berlin. You come home November 9th of 1989. That's how quickly you lose your freedoms. And that's how quickly they did in that part of the world. And that's where it's important for us to understand. As my father once said, that freedom is never more than a generation away from extinction. It's not passed on through the bloodstream. It's something that has to be fought for by every generation. And my father fought for it during his generation. He was concerned about others, but he was concerned more about the soul of America than anything else. It was my father who said, if we become one nation, what was it? A nation, well, we're a nation gone under. If we don't become a nation under God, we're a nation gone under. And there's a lot of people today who will tell you, we seem to be a nation gone under because we don't lift God up anymore as we should. We're afraid to because we may be laughed at or ridiculed. We need to be lifting God up if we're going to move anything forward. We need to be in prayer for our leaders, whether we agree with them or we disagree with them. If we're not praying for them, then it's on us. I remember Pastor Scott Bauer, Jack Hayford's son-in-law, passed away. He was a dear friend of mine a few years ago. In church on one Sunday, Pastor Scott asked the congregation, how many of us this last week had prayed for Bill Clinton. 4 or 5 hands went up. And he said, well, how many of you prayed for George Bush? A lot of hands went up. He said, did you ever think, because of your lack of prayer for Bill Clinton, that had you prayed for Bill Clinton, you might have been able to pray Monica Lewinsky out of the White House? But because Christians didn't do their job, Monica Lewinsky got it in the White House. I know there's a lot of people today upset about what happened last Tuesday. Their guy didn't win. Maybe your guy did win. But we don't then pick up our ball and go home and say, I'm not going to pray for the leadership. It's now even more important than ever to get down on our knees and pray for the leaders of this country, Democrat, Republican, and what have you. To put the covering of Christ over Washington, D.C., over our state capital, over our city of Los Angeles. Those are the things we need to be doing. And that's what I've truly learned from my father through all of these years. My father never got angry. He got into prayer. That's what his mother taught him back in the 1920s and 30s and what have you. And that's the way he lived his life, in prayer. And that's what we need to be doing now for our great country that we live in. And today especially, we also need to be praying for those who gave their lives for this nation so that we may be free, and those who are willing to give their lives for other countries so that they can live free. I remember one day bringing the ship in, as I go out on the ship as much as I can, and we're bringing it into dock in San Diego, and the captain says to me, why don't you take over the helm? And I just looked at him. He said, hey, you used to race boats. Go ahead. And I turn around, young man on the helm, and I looked at this young man. I said, well, how old are you, young man? He says, I'm 18, sir. I said, 18 years old, where are you from? He says, I'm from Kansas. What do you drive back home? Oh, sir, I don't have a driver's license. I don't drive back home. Think to myself, he's driving a $1 billion boat. But these are the kids who are the heroes of the world that we live in, to allow us to come to Trinity School and do the things that we do. So I would ask you to pray for them and be in constant prayer for the young men and women who serve in our military. Be in constant prayer for those who in fact serve this nation, Democrat, Republican, Independent. We need to be praying in earnest for those people who serve this nation. And only then will God answer our prayer and make this United States of America once again what my father always called her, a shining city on a hill where people from around the globe want to come to partake of God's land. Thank you so much.
What I'd like to do is set the context, just set a brief context for my comments, then tell some stories, and then give some basic fundamental principles with regard to classical and Christian education. Now, some of what I'm going to say, I'm sure, you can't have a school this successful, you can't have a school thriving the way this school is thriving without a number of you already knowing the things, some of the things I'm going to say. But as the Apostle Paul puts it in Philippians 3, to say the same things over again is no trouble for me, Paul says, and it's helpful for you. And that's what people of my advancing age have to start saying when people say you're repeating yourself. You say, well, the Apostle Paul said. Many students today are not taught how to think critically. They're not taught how to think Christianly. They're not taught how to they just want to check their Christianity in at the box office when they go into a movie, or when they're watching something on television, or when they're reading a book. And it's our responsibility as parents to equip them to think God's thoughts after Him in every area, whether we're evaluating a painting or listening to a piece of music or reading a book. And as we do this, you are not ruining it for them. Right? Many people say, well, I just need to just read the book and enjoy the experience and let the person, whoever's writing it, manipulate me however. No. Our fundamental marching orders, and this is the foundation underneath the Christian aspect of classical Christian education. The greatest command in Scripture, according to the Lord Jesus, was, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, all your brains, and all your strength. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, brains, and strength. Jesus said that's the greatest commandment in Scripture. It comes from Deuteronomy 6. And in Deuteronomy 6, you look at the passage and say, what is that passage about? It's about education. You shall teach your children when you rise up, when you walk along the road, when you lie down. And what do you teach them? Well, in the middle of that passage of what you teach your children, all the aspects of God's law, God's way of doing things, God's ways in the world. In the middle of this passage on education, we find the greatest commandment ever given. And that commandment is love the Lord your God with all your mind. How you think. Well, I think mathematically, I think historically, I think with words, I think aesthetically. And I have a responsibility as a Christian to love God as I watch a movie. I have a responsibility to love God as I read a book. I have a responsibility to love God as I do a math problem, if I'm balancing my checkbook. I have a responsibility to love God in all the activity of my mind. Moreover, I have a responsibility as a parent to teach my kids how to do the same thing. How do we love God? How do we love God intellectually? That doesn't mean that you walk into math class with a pious glow on your face and your hands like this. And then you just glide in 2 inches above the floor. Oh, here's the holy student. That's not what loving the Lord your God with all your mind means. But it does mean that you have to think these things through Christianly, and you have to teach your children how to do this, because it's not something that just comes to us naturally. So in a classical Christian school, we want to love God with everything we've got. We want it to be exuberant, because we're loving God, not putting up with God. It doesn't say put up with God with all your mind. We're loving Him, we're pursuing Him with all our mind. And if we're teaching our children successfully to do that, then the high morale that I mentioned earlier is going to be there. Why? Because we're pursuing God. We love Him. Look what He did for us. Look what He's done for us. Look what He's given us. How much has He given us? And in science class, the students are all going to be looking in the microscopes and hallelujah. Whoa, look at this is amazing. Just when I mentioned that when we first started, we didn't know. We were just trying it because we didn't know. But now we do. Right? We've seen the scoreboard. We've seen what happens. We've seen the results. So, with that, are there any questions?
How do you see this playing out? We're teaching our kids to be godly in an increasingly ungodly culture. And I think it's going to get more that way as we go. And our kids will be probably in the minority even more as we see things unfold in our country. Where do you see this experiment going, and how would it affect that?
Okay.
That we're doing?
Yeah. First, your students here, the students that you're going to be graduating from here, are going to be in the minority in 2 different ways. And those 2 different ways are going to be in tension with each other. One will put them at complete odds with the culture they're in, and that would be their love for Jesus. So if they graduate loving Jesus and living in an upright way and wanting to be faithful churchmen and churchwomen, if that's how they graduate, they're going to be increasingly the odd man out in this culture, right? That's the strike against them. The thing they're going to have going for them is they will be able to go into a business and make change, get a job and make change. They'll be competent in what they do. They will be checked out. They will be educated. One of our graduates went up to the University of Idaho after she graduated from Logos, and this is the sort of thing that happens periodically. But first day of class, and one of her classes, the first day of class, one of her teachers went on a rant against evangelical Christians generally and against Logos School in particular. You know, Logos School is this terrible place that just went on a rant. You think, why would that be going on in a college classroom? But it did. And then after the teacher was done with the rant, I think it was a lit class, she settled down and said, okay, I need to take stock of who we all are and what you all have read. How many of you kids have read this book? One hand went up. How many kids have read this book? One hand went up. How many kids have read this book? One hand, our alum. And she finally, that's very good. What school did you go to? So basically what's going to happen is, and there are ways to embrace this truth wrongly in a prideful, snooty way, but there's no escaping the fact that cream rises. Okay, if you know your subject, if you're competent, if you're educated, if you know how to think, you're going to do well, everything else being equal. Now, this will sometimes be in tension with your employer hates Christians and loves you, right? Because he can't get along without you. There'll be that sort of tension from time to time. And one of the things that you're going to have to, I'm sure you've battled this already, Americans are very funny with words. So we love excellence. We hate elitism, right? And they mean the same thing, but we love one and hate the other. So if you had, I don't know what your motto on your brochure is, but if you said striving for excellence in education, yeah, everybody, even the non-Christians, yeah, that's a good thing to do. Everybody's striving for excellence. But if you said striving for elitism, all the knives would come out. You know. But there's a reality there, and we give some exceptions. So the Navy SEALs are allowed to be an elite fighting unit. You know, we've got some small reserves where the word's okay, but in education, it's not okay. So you need to say, all right, we want to educate our children and teach them to love God with everything they've got. And if they graduate with those foundational tools of learning, they will be in a minority in a way that puts them at a distinct advantage. All right? They will be a minority in another way that puts them at a disadvantage. But that disadvantage is all right if God's going to bless it.
What would you say is the main common denominator among those highly educated Logos graduates that tank?
Okay, good.
Spiritually.
Yeah, when kids don't thrive, I mentioned earlier the triad of truth, goodness, and beauty. The place where where I think we're still failing to protect our children against relativism and crud is in the beauty department. So if you say to your average junior at a classical Christian school, what is true? Is Jesus Lord? Did Jesus rise from the dead? Everybody in the class, even the ones who are going to tank later, will say, no, Jesus is Lord. He rose from the dead. If he's Lord on Monday, he's Lord on Friday. That's constant. If you say, what about goodness? If an abortion is sin on Monday, is that same abortion a sin on Friday? They'd say, yes, good is constant. But if you say to your average American teenager, your band stinks. Your band sounds like a helicopter trying to land on a tin roof. Or something like that. Oftentimes the default assumption of many kids who ought to know better is to revert to relativism. Well, who's to say what beautiful is? Right? My problem is not that they differ with my evaluation of their band. The problem is how they're arguing. They're arguing from a relativistic premise. And in my experience, movies, television shows, internet sorts of things, games, and popular music are a massive catechetical force, just massive. And the kids who tank are the kids who were not taught to think critically interacting with popular culture. Not to put too fine a point on it. They've been discipled, they were simultaneously discipled by their parents and by us all the way through their education, and they got a good 20 credit hours in pop culture on the way to school and on the way home, and legalistic rules won't fix that. It won't address that.
Does it relate to family life?
Yes, it relates to family life. So what I did when my kids were there in the 90s at Logos, but when my kids were in junior high and high school, music videos were just coming online then. Now they're not so much the thing, but I remember sitting down with my kids. We'd turn on MTV and we'd watch one video, and we'd watch a video and I'd turn it off, and then I'd say, what was that about? What was that saying? What was the worldview? Right? And we talk about it. That was hedonism, or that was nihilism, or that was, this is a fragmented worldview. So I didn't say that's bad, ick, poo. What I wanted them to do was learn to see what they're saying. Learn the trick. What are they doing? How are they, how are they getting this message across? And if kids are never taught how the trick works, if they're not instructed by their parents or by the teachers or by teachers and parents in conjunction, then they're going to be a walking embodiment of Gullible's travels. And when they are, they're just going to be led off. And of course, Chesterton says Satan, when he fell by the force of gravity. When we sin downhill. It's easy to fall down in a fallen world. So pop culture is gratifying our lusts. It's enticing us. It's and if you have had no equipping in how to answer these things, which is what your classical education ought to have provided you with, then you're gonna crater. And I'll say one other thing. In saying that, in my mind, pop culture is the enemy of our day. But I'm not saying this as someone, I love rock and roll, I love the blues, I love, I don't have any, I'm not trying to keep vampires away. I want the students to think. And if you learn to think about a movie, for example, and it's a dumb movie, and you learn to think about it, and you see how dumb it is, you don't want to pay $6 to be insulted. Los Angeles. Well, Los Angeles, and also the last time I went to a movie was probably. So basically, that I think that is the place where we need to have rigorous teaching of aesthetics. What's the biblical grounding of aesthetics? What are the biblical principles? Like what makes something lovely? Is there something that's objectively lovely? All of that. And I just think that if our students know what beautiful music is, if they experience it, if they've been singing it for 4 years, if they've been in the choir doing it, and if they've engaged with great literature and they've looked at the themes of the great literature and popular, there's popular stuff done today that's really worthwhile, and they can tell the difference between that which is worthwhile and that which is just dumb and stupid.
Okay.
So students who are subjectivists are wrapped up in a bubble, and what education needs to do is break that bubble open, and get them out. Get them off the farm, get them so they're not so provincial, where they're just saying, well, I have these good sensations and other kids like it, and so that's enough for me. Well, no, that's not enough. So if I could jump to another illustration of this, and this is a parental child illustration. Mom, all the kids are going out to the movies tonight. They're, what's the movie? Well, I think it's Stupid Movie 3, you know. Stupid Movie 3. And Mom says, oh, I don't know. And what's the next question? Why? Why not? Why can't I go see it? All the kids are going, oh, they're all fine Christians. Their parents are fine Christians. Are you saying that we're better than they are? Why can't I go? And so Mom runs off to screenit.com to count the hells and dams, right? And which is problematic, because we've got these search engines that take it's a little filter that screens out all the objectionable parts of a movie and lets you have them in one spot, so you can just pick up the filter. So Mom does that and comes back and says, no, I don't want. Well, the kid knows that that's lame. Right? The kid knows that's lame. So assuming that it's not a horrendous movie that that the president and the Congress have denounced, and assuming that it's not some awful thing, you need to turn it around and say, well, why do you want to go? Well, because I'd like to. The kids are going, and it's not that bad, and blah, blah, blah. Well, sure, you can go, but your assignment is tomorrow night at dinner. We're going to get a movie review from you, and I want you to engage with it from a Christian worldview perspective, and tell us how a Christian ought to think about that movie. And it needs to be more than 30 seconds. You can't say, well, there was one bad scene and I went and got popcorn. You've got to give us a Christian worldview analysis of the movie. So the kid goes to see the movie, and then they stagger through an abysmal movie review the next night, right? They have to have something to say, so they go off to screenit.com and count the hells and dams, and then they give this pitiful, lame review. So, and you say, okay, thank you for sharing. And the next time, Stupid Movie 4 comes up, Mom, can I go to the movie? You say, oh, no, absolutely not. Well, why? What's wrong with the movie? You say, nothing's wrong with the movie as far as I know. Something's wrong with you, right? Yeah. The problem is not the movie. The problem was your last movie review. That was the problem. I need more from you. We expect more. We want you to love God with your brains. We want you to love God as a pop art critic. We want you to engage. And so the thing that, if you come down on the average teenager with just a flat no, and I'm not telling you the reasons, that's hard for us to take. And some of it is Adam, hard for us to take for bad reasons, but some of it's hard for us to take for legitimate reasons. You just don't like someone saying no and not giving reasons. But if you engage with your students and talk with them, you engage with your kids and talk with them, and teach them. And when you walk along the road, when you rise up, when you're in the car and you have the radio on and you listen to the song and you turn it off and say, what was that about? What's going on with that kids? What are they saying? That kind of thing is something that is very, very hard for them to resent, because they know that you're teaching them. They know that you're engaged. And you might say, well, that means I have to learn. Yeah, it does. They're your kids. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson.
And it's an issue that should be very simplistic, and so many people should understand, because frankly, schooling, your education, K through 12 in particular, is the only thing that I know of, the only purchase decision, if you want to call it that I know of in life, where you are essentially a slave to your zip code or a slave to your address. If I want to go out and have a Starbucks coffee, I can go to the one around the corner from my house, but if I don't like the barista there because he burns it all the time, which he does, I can go to the one across the street, or I can go to the one a mile away, or I can go to the one that's closer to my office. If I don't like the restaurants by my office in Santa Ana, which I don't, I can go to the office, I can go to the restaurants in Irvine, right? Or I can drive to Valencia and I can come and put my kids into school here, or I can go to church here, right? I have a choice for every purchase decision that I want to make, except for my child's education. The most important decision that I'll make in my entire life. And proponents of school choice make this argument all the time. The opponents say, oh, no, we need to keep our students locked into these schools. We need to keep the teachers employed. We need to make sure our local community is vibrant, even in communities where the schools are failing. Well, I tell you this, if you have a restaurant that's failing in your community, that restaurant goes away. If you have a market that's not providing the types of produce that you want to buy, that market goes away. If you have a different market down the street that has an awesome produce selection, more people go to that market. That market gets bigger. Maybe it has a satellite market down the road, and it keeps growing and growing and growing because of the quality service that it's putting forth for its customers. Imagine if we had that in education. And Wally used an analogy that I really like to use, which is the comparison to K through 12 education to higher education in California, which we often talk about as one of the most prestigious things we have in California. And it's very simple. If you look at the UC system, how many of you came out of the UC system? How many of you came out of USC? Anyone? Anyone? Oh, I like that too. Fight on. Okay. UC system's good too, don't get me wrong. But if you look at the two arguably best UCs in the state, and I'm saying arguably, and we can have a debate about it later, but arguably, I think most people in most rankings would say the best two are UC Berkeley, which I can make a joke about, but I won't, and UCLA, which I can make a lot of jokes about, but I won't. And if you look at why those two schools are so successful, there's a variety of things that you can look to. But one of the pivotal reasons that both UC Berkeley and UCLA are so successful is because both of those universities have to compete. They have to compete with highly successful, competitive, private schools. In the case of UC Berkeley, it's Stanford, right? Maybe the best school in our state, which has research dollars, which has the best faculty, which has some of the best programs, both at the undergraduate and graduate levels. USC, the same thing is true. So UCLA and Berkeley had to kind of up their game a little bit, or they'd lose all their faculty, they'd lose all of their students, and they'd frankly lose all of their donations and grant monies and research dollars to the private institutions. Imagine if you could do that in your local communities, where you have a local public school that's failing, and a poor mother, single mother who has 3 children enrolled in the local high school, who can't afford to go to a private school, can say, you know what, I want my children to have a better life. I want my children to go to a UC Berkeley. I want them to be able to go to a UCLA. I want them to be able to go to a Stanford. I want them to be able to go to a USC so that they can achieve things that I was never able to achieve in my life. But they're trapped. They're trapped in a failing school that doesn't work. But imagine for a second if we lived in a different time, in a different world, maybe a year from now, maybe 2 years from now, where that same mother can say, you know what? This school isn't working for me. I'm going to take my children and I'm going to take the tax dollars that accompany them and I'm going to put them in this private school around the corner. And another parent did that, and another parent did that. What would happen? Eventually, sure, this private school would be impacted, but another private school might open up, or this private school would expand. But you know what? The bad teachers and the bad administration and the bad goings on at this other school, which was imprisoning our children and their future, is gone. And that's the importance of the school choice movement. And so, this year, I'm so impressed that with many of you who are kind of new to the school choice movement, you've got this many people out there, and that, John, is a testament to your work and everyone's work here, and a testament to each and every one of your commitments to your children and your children's future. But we can't stop here. This is an issue that we can gain traction on regardless if you're a Democrat, regardless if you're a Republican, regardless if you're a man of faith, regardless if you're not. This is an issue that we all understand and we should be able to agree upon, but not enough of us are informed and educated. And so this room is the first step in joining a movement of hundreds of thousands of people around the country that's going to help change and reshape education in our country and in California.
Let me go through this, a few of these myths. The first myth that you'll often hear is the one that says that parental choice doesn't benefit students. There's a fellow who you may have heard of, a guy named Barry Lynn. He's the executive director of Americans United for the Separation of Church and State. He's always quoted in the newspapers. And he said that there's no evidence that vouchers, for example, make any academic difference. He says there's no link between vouchers and student achievement. Studies continue to show that there have been no significant improvements in student achievement in voucher-receiving schools. Well, there have been these types of random assignment studies done on vouchers, for example. And what do they show? Well, what they show is overwhelming evidence that vouchers improve student performance. There have been 10 studies using this random assignment model, and 9 out of the 10 studies have found that vouchers have had a positive impact on raising student achievement, either amongst all voucher-receiving students or at least groups of voucher-receiving students. And these studies cover voucher programs in Milwaukee, Washington, D.C., New York City, and a number of other places. And none of these studies have found that vouchers have had a negative impact on the performance of students. So not surprisingly, if student achievement is rising because the students are receiving these vouchers, parental satisfaction with the program is astronomical. So when surveys of these parents in these studies are done, they show that those parents are extremely satisfied with the private school education that their children are receiving versus what they would have received had they have been unfortunate enough to go to the regular system. The second thing is, I think one of the things that was mentioned here too is that parental choice, the other myth, parental choice harms the public schools, right? You've often heard that if we enact a choice system for all of you and for all your neighbors in your communities, that somehow that'll really kill the local public schools. John Sanstelli, who's a very prominent economist over at UC Berkeley, speaking of UCs, says that parental choice policies which put a private education within the financial reach of more families could trigger a progressive decline in public schools, unraveling the public school system. Yeah, is that true? So, because obviously there are choice systems that have been instituted, not just in the United States, but across the world. And what has happened? Well, again, if you look at this using this random assignment model that I've talked to you about, there have been 19 studies using this model, this method, to see whether voucher programs and tax credit scholarship programs have impacted academic achievement in public schools, not the private schools, in public schools. And what's interesting is 18 out of 19 of these studies have found that vouchers actually improve the achievement of students in public schools. And so therefore, what you saw in the Swedish research after the implementation of their voucher program was that the rising tide raised all boats. So of course, the academic improvement was significant of the kids who are now going to private schools, but it was also significant in those kids who remained in the public system, because that system decided that they needed to do something about how they were teaching those kids. So we now come, because I've talked about a universal system in Sweden, we now come to the issue about why middle-class parents, why all of you, who, again, thank you, as the other speakers have mentioned here today, thank you for coming out on a Friday to hear all of us speak, but I think on a very important issue, which I think that is going to make it worth your while to have spent this time with us. So anyway, there's the economic injustice argument why all of you should, A, receive something, and also therefore be activists in this fight. But I want to touch on one last thing before I close, and that's that one of the biggest arguments, and I was talking about this with, I think, with Liz earlier tonight, that opponents of choice will make against those of us who support it, is that choice does not support those with special needs. So, for example, The National Education Union Association, the largest teachers union in the country, says that vouchers do not give parents real educational choice. Participating private schools may limit enrollment and in many cases may maintain exclusive admissions policies and charge tuition and fees far above the amount provided by the vouchers. So basically discriminate against kids with special needs. Well, first of all, that's simply not true. I mean, you only have to look at Trinity, for example, which has a significant number of kids who have special needs who are enrolled and are doing very well and who are welcomed and accepted here, right? To see that that is a lie. But also, too, you have to look at the types of programs that those who support school choice and who are in positions of power have enacted. They're not just enacting programs for people like all of you here and low-income families in, in the inner city. They're enacting programs specifically to deal with the issues of those with special needs. So, for example, North Carolina passed the Tax Credits for Children with Disabilities law, which gives parents of students with special needs a tax credit for expenses related to private school tuition and other educational services. Ohio enacted the John Peterson Special Needs Scholarship Program that will provide a voucher scholarship to students with disabilities. Florida has a special needs voucher program called the McKay Scholarships. I talked with some folks at Montessori School there, the Blossom Montessori School for the Deaf in Clearwater, Florida. It was founded in 2003, 3 years after the voucher program was established statewide. And the school says that that program allows parents of students with disabilities to choose the best learning environment for their children. So this choice movement is not just for kids who are able to be mainstream. These are for kids from every background, with every type of disability or need. So in conclusion, let me say this. There are lots of reasons why middle-class parents, like all of you and your children, should be vocal and vigorous advocates for school choice. I've talked about the underperformance of public schools in middle-class and affluent areas, schools that are not as good as you think. But there are also other reasons too, which we haven't discussed tonight, but which we can talk about in the question and answer period. The increasing control by the federal government over local public schools, which I have written about in a book that came out last year called Obama's Education Takeover, which I highly recommend to you. The propagandizing of our children in public schools, and the lack of respect for the values that many of you in this room hold. Unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on how one looks at it, and I live in Sacramento, so I get to see all of that stuff going on firsthand in the state capitol. And I'm telling you, what all of you probably believe, they don't care, and they're making laws that affect each and every one of you, and what are you to do about it? You can't opt out, at least as it stands now. So unless you all have a choice option, you're going to be stuck if you still have kids in a public school and don't have the discretionary income. So I think what we need to do is to enact a universal program that addresses all of your needs, because you take and I end with the example of Sweden again. In Sweden, when the center-right government enacted the voucher program in the early 1990s, well, as you know, in politics, governments change, right? So the moderates went out of power. Who came in? The socialists, right? Who have ruled Sweden for most of the 20th century. And what happened, though? You would think the very first thing that they would have done would have been to repeal the voucher program. Nope, they couldn't. Why? Because it was universal. And the parents of their constituents had access to those vouchers, and they liked it. And they didn't want them to be taken away from them now, because they've been able to use it. And so therefore, this is interesting, because not only did they keep the program, but the number of private schools under the socialist government actually went up exponentially, much more so than when even the moderates were in power. And in fact, at the last socialist convention in Sweden, they actually took the entire issue of choice and vouchers off the table. It's permanent now in Sweden. So therefore, I think that that's the type of future that we have to look forward to if all of you and your neighbors and others, if we form this movement that Wally was talking about with, that went from hundreds to thousands of events across this country, where hundreds of thousands, millions of people now are participating in this. And so we need to get it, we need it to become a movement that is seen as a broad cross-sectional movement, not something that is only going to help folks in downtown Washington, for example. It has to help everybody. And with that, I want to thank you all for coming here tonight and listening, and I hope that we can count on you to be foot soldiers in our battle. Thank you.
Michigan State University Television presents Christopher Parkening in Recital. Our guest today is the distinguished American classical guitarist Christopher Parkening, an artist of such stature that he has been hailed by Andres Segovia as a great artist, one of the most brilliant guitarists in the world.
advice would you give to young students who struggle with nerves ruining their performances?
Really great question. Performance anxiety. Great question. I remember Segovia said to me years ago, if you're really, really nervous, he said you can lose 50% of your technique. which is a disaster for anybody in music. I remember reading in the Musician's Union magazine that the stress applied to a classical artist to play perfect is tantamount to a jet fighter pilot in combat. And of course, there's really no comparison in that one, you lose your life, and the other one, you get a bad review. So there's really no comparison, but stress is something that plays on every performer, every musician. I had something happen to my ring finger on my left hand. I had invited my sister, her husband, and their children up to a cabin in the high Sierras. And the boys slept on a couch bed in the living room. Well, it was morning, and I thought, well, I'll just fold up the couch bed, not knowing that the ring finger of my left hand was between two metal scissors. And as I started to push the bed out from one side, my sister ran over and said, I'll help you. Oh. It clamped down on my finger and was pouring blood. I didn't know if I'd broken my finger or what, but 6 days later, I was to play with the Los Angeles Philharmonic in the Hollywood Bowl. Oh. And first we prayed about everything, tried to get the bleeding under control, and my brother-in-law took the car about 3/4 of a mile away and found a doctor, brought him up, and he said, well, the good news is you haven't broken your finger, but he said there's a danger of infection, and you better, if I were you, I'd get back to LA. So we packed up, and I got ice and the fast food chains going back down to LA, and soaked my finger to keep the swelling down. And I remember that first day, I couldn't even touch the guitar. My whole hand had turned black and blue. When you have a really traumatizing injury like that. And the second day, I started to try and put my finger down, but it was excruciating. It hurt so bad. And I'm thinking to myself, I need to be practicing more for the, normally I'd be putting in 5-hour days, and I couldn't. 3 days before, I started to play a little bit of this difficult, the Concierto de Aranjuez by Rodrigo, a little bit, but it was way too slow, and it still hurt tremendously. Second day before, I played maybe a little bit faster, but it was still so painful. And, normally, if there's a really big concert, I wouldn't be sleeping that great the night before. I'd be thinking, well, 24 hours from now, I'll be walking out on stage. But that night, somebody had given me a tape of John MacArthur preaching from 2 Corinthians 12:9, which says, and he said unto me, this was the Apostle Paul, my grace is sufficient for you, for my strength is made perfect in weakness. Most gladly, therefore, I would rather glory in my infirmities, that the power of Christ may rest upon me. And then John went on to say this, so the suffering that humbles us, the suffering that forces us to God in prayer, the suffering that makes us cry out for a grace to endure, is the very source of power in our lives. It is when the Christian has lost all human ability to deal with this difficulty, when he is weak, without resources, and destitute, and left totally to trust in God's power and grace to sustain him, that he becomes a channel through which God's power can flow. And I listened to that, and honestly, I went to bed that night. I slept great. And the following night, I knew I couldn't wear a Band-Aid on it. It would restrict my movement. So I walked out under those hot lights, 17,000 people at the Hollywood Bowl. And I have to honestly say, totally by the grace of God, it was one of the best times I had ever played the Concierto de Aranjuez by Rodrigo. And when I walked off stage, the manager of the LA Phil said, "Chris, what a wonderful concert." And I said, Ernest Fleischman is his name. I said, "Ernest, look." And he gasped. He said, "When did that happen?" I said, "It happened 6 days ago." He said, "How did you play?" I said, "Totally and completely by the grace of God." But one other real quick story. As was mentioned in the film, Kathleen Bell, the soprano, and I had a recording up for Best Classical Record. And we were invited to play on the Grammy Awards live television show for CBS. And we had prayed before the performance, and it was so active backstage, you just can't imagine. The stage people, in a live show like that, they're going to millions of people. We had a certain stage set up, and they wheeled that out and got us settled, and I'm working with my chair and footstool, and she's getting positioned. And there was a guy standing about 10 feet to my right with a headphone, and he leans over to me and he says, "Mr. Parkening, 20 seconds till air." I said, "Okay." And then he said this, "Well, in 20 seconds, you'll be performing for over 200 million people live." If you wanted to jinx somebody, that's what you would say. Kathy heard it too. And I said, "Kathy, the only important thing is for us to play and sing for the Lord, right?" And she said, "You're right." We got our focus back. But sometimes things like that happen. I find too that it's very helpful for me to contemplate Bible verses. And one of them is Philippians 4:6-9. "Be anxious for nothing, but in everything by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God. And the peace of God, which passes all understanding, shall guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus." And it doesn't say in that verse that He'll answer your prayer. Taking the supplication to Him, that's what you get the peace from. Another one is Romans 8:28, and we know that all things work together for good for those that love the Lord. Proverbs 3:5-6, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not into your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge Him, and He shall direct your paths." It's so important to have the right focus, to practice hard, to pray about your performance. I have one other story about performance anxiety and the sovereignty of God. I was playing 4 concerts with a symphony orchestra, playing the Fantasia para un Gentilhombre by Joaquin Rodrigo, which closes with an incredibly difficult, fast run on the guitar. It starts up in the very highest notes, screams down to the lower strings, and blisters back up to the high notes on the guitar. And I was invited after that first concert out to dessert with a Christian couple. And so we ordered, and the lady asked me a very unusual question that I don't often get asked. She said, "Chris, how do you think you played?" I said, "Well, not that great, really." because I dropped some notes in that run. And then she said, well, did you practice really hard? I said, certainly did. She said, did you pray about it? Absolutely. I prayed about it. Well, then she said, know this, that God is sovereign, and He can have the people hear exactly what He wants them to hear. I said, well, yeah, I know that in theory, but I also know I dropped those notes. The next morning, in the newspaper, you know, it comes at your hotel, every door has a newspaper. I opened the door, took out the paper, went to the entertainment section, front page, and this is what it said, headline, Parkening plays perfect concert. I was absolutely shocked, but it verified the fact that God is in perfect control of everything. I was raised in a quote-unquote Christian home, and we went to church occasionally, and I read the Bible. And my parents had me baptized when I was quite young, and they told me that I was a Christian. So I always believed that I was. And yet my lifestyle did not characterize anything that I now know to be a Christian. I just believed some facts about Jesus, that was all. As you've already heard, I started the guitar at the age of 11 with the inspiration of a cousin of mine who at that time was staff guitarist at MGM Studios. And when I wanted to play the guitar, he said, you've got to do two things, Chris. First, start with classical guitar and get a good foundation in guitar technique. Secondly, he said, get the records of Andre Segovia. He's the greatest guitarist in the world. So I started classical and loved it and stayed with it. I practiced hard on my music stand at home. I taped a note that reads, Chris, what are you here for? And just as my touring guitar bears the scars of having been used to create music, so I pray that my imperfect life will be an instrument in God's hands for His purposes and to His glory. Some years ago, my niece Christy came over to our home, and I asked her this question. I said, Christy, she was 11 years old at the time. I said, Christy, if you were to die tonight and stand before God, and He were to say to you, why should I let you into my heaven, what would you say? And I'll never forget, she said, well, I would say, because I've been a good girl. I said, well, how good have you been? Have you been perfect? She said, no. I said, right, the Bible says all have sinned and come short of the glory of God. There's none righteous, no, not one. Next, I told her that you're saved by the grace of God through faith. Ephesians 2:8-9 says, for by grace are ye saved through faith, and that not of yourselves, it's a gift of God, not of works or good deeds, lest any man should boast. So I said, you can stand before God when you die, and you can say, I've been a good girl. And if you say that, you will fall short. You can stand before God when you die, and you can say, and I've had people say this to me, the good I've done outweighs the bad. I'll be fine. If you say that, you will fall short. Or you can even invent your own standard for heaven. You know, I just think if you're a good person and you're nice to people and you provide for your family and you're kind to animals, you'll be fine. You're going to heaven. If you say that, you will fall short. My little boy Luke loves basketball. He's been to several Lakers games, and he's a Clippers fan too. Mm-hmm. But a friend of mine purchased 2 tickets to see the Lakers and the Miami Heat play. I think the ticket value was like $269. but he paid $1,200 a piece to be right on the floor. Can you imagine a guy walking up to the gatekeeper that takes the tickets and says, you know, I really don't think these two teams are all that great. I'll give you $10 to come in. What would the ticket guy say? Hey, you either pay the full price or you don't come in, but you certainly don't set your own standard. And you know, that's the way people do about heaven. And I told Christy, there's only one correct answer to that question. If you were to die tonight and stand before God, and he were to say to you, why should I let you into my kingdom, my heaven? Only one correct answer. Jesus Christ died for my sins. He paid my penalty on Calvary's cross. And he is my Lord and he is my Savior. And on that basis alone would I be able to enter God's kingdom, God's heaven. So we had a great talk that day, and I've been able to share that story literally thousands of times.